Hi, I'm Acasha, and I will be analyzing the aesthetic effects of the episode Nosedive from Black Mirror, the Netflix TV series. I will be looking at three different aesthetic elements, including sound, setting, and characterization. And to start off with sound, sound is one of my favorite parts of any media, of any TV or movie media, because first of all, I love music, and so it was really interesting going into this and to see how going into this show to see how the soundtrack or the lack thereof of music in this show and the sound effects see how they amplified the overall theme and message that the show is trying to communicate. So it was really interesting to see that there is a very simple sort of soundtrack going on in the background. Really, very scarce. Scarcely there a lot of somber moments that are not somber, but quiet moments that require music. Only really I noticed it in the beginning, whenever there's this peaceful sort of display made of the town that Lacey lives in, which was really interesting to set up that sort of setting, which we'll get to a little later. And it was also really interesting to notice that some of the sound effects that would be made are almost like video game-ish. They reminded me of some video games that I might play. Whenever, like, for example, like whenever pings go off on the cell phone or the technology that they're using in the show. And then another really interesting thing was the moments of awkward disconnection that happen, like in the elevator scene when Lacey is trying to make small talk with her coworker, but there's no background noise whatsoever, which I found very like awkward as a watcher. While they're both like just checking their feeds respectively, completely ignoring each other, not talking to one another, which is very, very strange, sort of in that moment, you know. And it shows that the creators allow this moment of silence to happen, and consequently allow the idea of the lack of anonymity that these characters have, to amplify the fact that these people don't talk to each other anymore at all to find out any information about the person, because they're already expected to know certain aspects of each other, or else they commit the greatest sin of being rude to each other and lowering their respective ranks. And all of this is translated through a little bit of context about the world that they live in, and that single moment of silence, of looking on each other's phones and ignoring each other, which was really, really cool to see. So, in regards to the setting is integral to the episode because it sets up it's a sort of deception that the creators of the story are making here, because we're presented with this positive, peaceful, upper middle class suburbs sort of village that the main characters are living in, but underneath it is hidden this sort of like Pavlov's dog, classical conditioning environment that they're living in, despite the setting looking perfect and pristine and beautiful. The actual effects of that environment, the assumed effects of that environment, which would be, positive and happy and peaceful, are the complete opposite of what you would think. Because of this Pavlov's dog's classical conditioning, where people are rewarded for good and punished for bad. This is the basis of the Nosedive world. A great example of the negative consequences of this is when Lacey is at the airport. When Lacey's at the airport and she's in distress. She for the first time ever lets out a little bit of anger, and that has terrible negative consequences for her. The security guard smiles at her and does not use force, does not use the law at all, if there even is a law, and instead threatens to lower her rank, then does lower her rank. And yes, it reminds me of this quote that I can't remember who said it, but it goes like this. It says, "The punishment of failure is much bigger than the reward of success," which is so true to not only Pavlov's dog's theory, but also to the very world that Nosedive takes place in. Yeah, and the very essence of the show earlier on displays this, the dichotomy of how the transition of Lacey's journey ends up happening. Because earlier on in the episode, we see Lacey succeeding, and we see her taking a picture of her cookie, posting it, and then getting likes, getting more higher rankings, even though that was like the smallest possible thing she could have done. Like, it was such a minute thing in her day that rewarded her very greatly. I mean, this is like a continual cycle of like doing these things to get higher rankings. But then later in the episode, when she does one mistake in the airport and lets a little bit of anger show, she is now homeless. She is now possibly the lowest rank that she's ever been in her entire life, and hitchhiking on the side of the road, which is too big of a punishment for the failure that she did, and it outweighs that reward of success that this quote very clearly puts it. Yeah. To sum up, the characterization of Lacey is the campaign that Erin Greer calls wages for face work. In her close reading of the episode, which is by using the framework of the wages for housework movement in the 1970s. Face work, unlike reproductive labor, similar but different from reproductive labor in certain ways. But face work is basically everything that the characters in Nosedive participate in, which is the upkeep of their like online presence, which takes up the entirety of their lives. And Erin Greer compares this to the reproductive labor movement in the 1970s, where the labor that it took to take care of children and to take care of the house took up as much time as these characters are putting into social media. Tolentino also characterizes not only Lacey but all the characters in the show in a very good quote that says that the aesthetic is also marked by a familiar human aspiration towards a generic sameness, which is similar to how the world functions in Nosedive, in this hierarchical method where the more conventionally pretty you are, the higher rank you have. And these beauty standards are shown when Lacey, the previous picture of beauty and status, must hitch a ride with Susan, who is, as Lacey says, old and does not follow any of the conventions of the ranking system, since she like curses openly and doesn't seem to care how she looks. Which is a stark contrast to Lacey, who is always wearing very flattering outfits, compared to Susan, who is dressed in grays and loose-fitting clothes. In the same way that Tolentino seeks out plastic surgery, despite not getting any work done, just entering the space made her feel deeply insecure, which is the fuel of the plot of Lacey's journey from the very beginning, when she's smiling, practicing her smile in the mirror. Thank you.